Hello and welcome back to the Fourth Industrial Revolution podcast. This is episode 3. I am delighted and pleased to have a fellow YouTuber and AI commentator along for the ride. So please welcome Dylan from Curious AI, or what's your channel's name? Dylan AI or Curious AI?
Well, just Dylan Curious for right now. So I
Dylan
started
Curious,
wanting
okay.
to talk about like quantum mechanics and all this stuff, and then I was like, no, just focus down on AI. So Dylan Curious -AI is what I am as of today.
Perfect. Yep. So fellow YouTuber, up and coming, really sharp guy, really funny. I love his channel. Just all the really kind of commentary that he adds. So yeah, today we're going to have another deep dive. I think the two topics that we're gonna cover, we're gonna talk about jobs, the impact that AI is having on jobs, which the data is kind of inconclusive, but then the potential impact. And then we're gonna pivot to talk a little bit deeper into P-Doom or P-Win and kind of where it's all going and that sort of thing. So with all that, Dylan, you want to give yourself a quick plug?
Yeah, I guess just a quick introduction. I kind of like went to school. I studied bioinformatics. I was like, when I was a kid, I thought biology and information were just the coolest. And I didn't even end up graduating from college. I ended up starting a startup with some friends. We built software for like the ticketing systems that were like selling tickets for Sundance Film Festival in Park City, and then turned that into my own company. Ended up getting some investors that were here in Las Vegas, and there's this guy named Tony Hsieh. He was CEO of Zappos, sold to Amazon, pretty close to a billionaire, and just was doing all this really cool stuff. So I got a chance to see some really, really awesome like interplay between city and government and big business, and especially with the tech space where he was trying to kind of reinvent a culture that would be different. And I'm super fortunate to have a firsthand experience with all of that. And along the way, got really into systems thinking. So a lot of like Jeffrey West's kind of book on scaling laws and how cities and people and stuff interact. And then that is kind of what got me interested in artificial intelligence. I mean, casually, I was doing a lot of software development, but I kind of just started playing around with TensorFlow as an amateur and sort of realizing the power. Actually, ever since I saw Watson do the IBM thing, like, that was so long ago now, but there was something magic just about the way there was this one little clip where they described how a machine can learn different variations of the font A, the letter A in different fonts, and how you don't have to program it. And I just, even back then, I knew there was sort of something special about where this was going. But seeing like the rise of the attention mechanisms and like taking over the recurrent neural networks, I just started to feel like, wow, now we're kind of really approaching that moment. And it got kind of very serious for me. I was like, this is really different. And I personally feel that there's something kind of really unknown that we're about to step into, and it just sort of drives me to want to know everything I can about it. And that's kind of what led me to being like, man, if I want to do this full time, maybe I can just make a YouTube channel and do this research on my free time. And that's kind of led me to the journey I'm on now.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And for me, that holy crap moment was when Google released Universal Sentence Encoder, which was the first like kind of semantic embedding technology. That was kind of the precursor. That was the first half of the transformer, right? Because that was the encoder, and now we have the encoder and decoder architecture. But when I saw that we now had the ability to encode arbitrary semantic meaning, which verbal lexical meaning from human speech to machine vectors, I said this is going to change everything. And so then it was a couple years between Universal Sentence Encoder to GPT-2, and GPT-2 was a hot mess. Like it could barely understand like a Wikipedia sentence, and then GPT-3, and the rest is history. So yeah, very very fascinating path that you've taken, and so thanks for sharing that story. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, so I hate to say it, but when I had a friend who had access to GPT-2, and then I've got to see some YouTube videos of like the early versions of 3, and it still didn't click. Like I still kind of thought of these bag of words models and some of the curated data sets that IBM was working on as really what AI was about. And yeah, I hate to say it, but it's surprising how into it I was, and then how it also kind of went past me, the magic of it. And then it clicked all of a sudden when I really saw people using GPT or Chat GPT, pretty much GPT-4, to do real things. And the generalization kicked in on the the types of like semantic meaning it was learning, the fact that I just like did a paper on the video that's coming out tomorrow on how good it is at chemistry. But this isn't a chemist. This is a next token prediction thing. You know what I mean? And I'm like, gosh, how is it picking up so much of our reality, or how Sora is picking up physics, and all that stuff really didn't hit until kind of the beginning of 2023, I guess, like when I really started feeling, oh my gosh, like this came in a way I didn't expect. But I guess a lot of people in the industry would say that too. I mean, it seems like DeepMind was taken off guard too. So if they're taken off guard, no worries if I was.
No, I mean, I'm reminded of, Nick Bostrom with superintelligence and instrumental convergence, and people have been talking for years about like, oh, well, you can't have an objective function that doesn't go AWOL eventually and kill everyone. But nobody predicted that the objective function that would lead us, at least get us closer to AGI, would be predicting the next word, right?
I know.
It's not. You're not trying to optimize for anything other than accurately predict the next word.
Yeah, and then a second I got my head around, okay, like I can kind of understand this latent space. I can understand how there's these clusters of word fragments, these tokens, and that there's a certain meaning that's like emerging from the distance between everything. Then, things like I started seeing how general attention is. Like I didn't expect it to work with, Sora is basically chunks of like 30 frame per second pixels, and it's like, that doesn't seem like that could be a token. And then I'm starting to see different ways people think about these tokens, and it still keeps working. And I was like, oh, even the idea of a token is starting to be generalized. And now we're like, we're reading people's dreams. We're seeing all sorts of patterns between data that we just would have never thought there was a signal in before.
Right. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of from a purely informational standpoint, like what is a token? It's like a meme, right? It's the smallest unit of useful, coherent information, right? And then it's not just how one token exists. It's not just the ontological, whatever context or format of a single token. It's all the tokens, how they relate to each other. Because it's to put it very reductively, it's pattern recognition. But as you're saying, like that concept of attention plus tokenization plus transformer architecture, it is generalizing far more broadly than anyone realized. I remember there was when I first got started, I was on the Multimodal Future podcast. I can't remember the guy's name. He kind of fell off. I think he's done a few other videos, but he called it back then. The future is multimodal, and this was before even there was much public information about multimodal training. So that's just you're right. Like, nobody really, a few years ago, nobody really knew that this would carry us this far. But of course, they said scale is all you need, attention is all you need. So far, that has proven to be true.
Yeah, well, it almost feels like relationships are all you need. Like I'm getting this gut instinct that there is a whole conversation about like, what did you make your token out of? Like, was it video fragments? Was it like edges? Was it word fragments or any kind of MRI type things or all sorts of stuff? It almost feels like the whole conversation about what the data that you're putting in and what the token isn't nearly as important as it's just relationship. It's the relationships between the tokens. And in so many ways, I'm trying to get my head around why the relationships are the answer. The meaning is in the distance, the multidimensional distance or something. Because, just the tokens keep becoming changed and we keep getting amazing results. So like what is that? Like it's the relationship. It's, I don't know. It's sort of fascinating. Yeah. And then you can even start thinking about the biology of our body and like what it is to be us. And you're like, oh, it's not really about like exactly how many cells you have in your body. It's the relationship between how they interact that brings this whole human experience together.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a fair point. And I have often thought that perhaps even consciousness is more about the organization of the energy and matter. It's not just the physical structure of the brain. There's an energetic and a temporal component, as well as the physical component. Now, I know we're diving off into a deep rabbit hole, but I tend to agree that it is about the relationships. And from a technical standpoint, it was a matter of scale. Enough layers for your deep neural network, for your transformer, enough data, enough training permutations, and it is able to discern those patterns or embed those patterns. Now, is it the most efficient way? No, but we're finding more efficient training algorithms all the time.
In fact, at the last video I did, there is a Microsoft paper where they're trying to just bring down the size of these LLMs, and instead of some of the patterns in the past have been like with Orca to generate more efficient data and train a new system. But there's some research going on where they're going in and just trying to prune out the layers or the tokens that don't matter, but it still is giving good results. And seems like there's a lot of fascinating stuff going on there where we might be able to shrink something just as powerful as GPT-4 with very marginal kind of loss. Like it's a compression in a sense. I mean, I guess GPT-4 is a compression of the internet, but this is like a compression of GPT-4 that would be much smaller to run, but it would still have all the important relationships left over instead of a retrained model. So, I mean, maybe we'll be able to get something, the size of a brain soon. So,
I hope so. And certainly we have not exhausted any of the avenues of research yet, and at least not that I have heard. Scale has not been exhausted yet. Improving attention mechanisms has not been exhausted. Improving distillation, like I don't know. Did you see that they're starting to work on 1-bit transformers? Not even just like low, but just like where it's binary, activation functions.
Yeah,
so,
I didn't dive into that paper, but I know, and they said they got huge efficiency out of it or something too from that 1-bit system.
Yep, and I think NVIDIA, their chips, they went to from floating point 32 down to the next generation is 4-bit floating point. So they're just finding, okay, you don't really need super high precision math to do this, and you think like, okay, well, how precision or how precise is a human neuron, really? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's also very noisy. In the human brain.
Yeah, and I find it's a strange analogy because probably the meaning for your own life as David Shapiro is like your relationship to your audience, to your loved ones, to your work colleagues, to even versions of yourself in the past that have like helped shape this narrative that you see yourself as. There's just something magical there. Yeah.
So that is a perfect segue. So one of the kinds of relationships that we all have is relationship to work. Now, there's tons and tons of history and economic theory and even philosophy to unpack with respect to why does money exist, what do we use it for? But for the sake of, I guess, the conversation, we can just accept the way that the world works today is that you need to work to get money. Money is how you pay for all the goods and services that you need, kind of at a basic level. Money is a proxy for stuff that you want or need. So I guess to kick it off, some of the data that I've been looking at, so just a couple days ago, the Bureau of Labor Statistics just announced their latest jobs data, and unemployment dropped or less. And I looked at all of the graphs and stuff, and it looks like that jobs growth is decelerating. But according to some people on the internet, and I actually did some quick Perplexity research, the Fed is keeping interest rates high to cool the economy off, because if things are more expensive, then the idea is that will curtail inflation. So jobs are slowing down at the expense of trying to get inflation under control. That seems like the prevailing narrative. I'm not entirely convinced, but I'm also not an expert economist. But at the same time, Jon Stewart, famous comedian and talk show host, has been making more noise about the false promise of AI and how it's going to start taking jobs and what are we going to do about it. So I'm kind of, the more I know about it, the less certain I am. Now, I do think that in the long run, it's rather predictable that we're going through another industrial revolution. So the nature of productivity, the nature of work and economics is we're entering into a new paradigm. But what is the nature of that paradigm? And so, I think you and the audience probably know my position that we're heading for post-labor economics. So I want to pause there and get your take.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Okay, so I have these kind of, I guess we do sort of milestones, because I can imagine in my simulations of how this is all going to play out, down the road, things looking just incredibly different. I'm not even sure jobs are going to be any sort of way to think about what it means to be alive or to derive meaning. But yeah, in the short term, just kind of looking a little bit ahead, it does, I would just have to think that the jobs narrative that everybody talks about, where coding kind of goes first, and then some of these creative jobs kind of go down the hill first, artists that like just are relevant to the tools that we're seeing go down. And then I think there's a lot of a vocal sort of disruption. I would say, like, I think Twitter and social media and politicians become under like really intense pressure as there's just a lot of people who don't have work. They can't find, and even worse than that, they can't find meaning and they can't find a livelihood. Like if you find meaning and a livelihood without work, I think we can make that progression. But by the way, I'm generally like kind of an AI pessimist, even though I talk about all this stuff all the time. But yeah, I think it gets really, really ugly in 2025 and 2026. I could be wrong. Like I hope this goes smoother and it's more like, oh, Dylan's a Luddite, and that we can find ways to get through this. But it just, to me, feels like it's going to hit really quick when decision making gets offloaded, and CEOs are super incentivized to make better decisions for less money, and humans they're just way expensive compared to these kind of things. Yeah, the inflation question. Yeah, that's probably, yeah. I mean, that's it. On the economics thing, we have another problem going against us, which is that in the U.S., we've always been able to print excess of money because all these other countries will take our cash from us, right? And then as we have inflation, it's kind of nice. Like we're sort of taxing the other countries to our benefit. But certainly for a long time now, China's been trying to get kind of their gold standard and their oil thing working between Russia. And it seems like that's kind of in full swing now. And we really printed way more than we should be. And if they're not taking on our cash overseas, and that debt's, and then it's just hitting us at home, which is like, seems like it's the story that, yeah, it does seem like the Fed would have to, sacrifice jobs, I would guess, to just keep that balanced.
Yeah. No, I mean, and so there are quite a few threads to pull on here. And one that I want to bookmark is meaning and livelihood, or meaning versus livelihood, depending on how you want to unpack that. But then also just on a more immediate scale, because I think you look at it in a similar way that I do, which is, what are the behaviors that are incentivized? And so in some respects, whether you're a small business or a global enterprise, you always have competition as one set of pressures. If your competitor is automating with AI, then you have to, or they're just going to undercut you and you're going to go out of business. And there on a smaller scale, there are cases of, and before I share the story, I don't want to say I don't endorse it one way or another. It's just a thing that happens. Like, don't shoot the messenger. But one thing is that for particularly small businesses, whether it's construction or restaurants in particular, that will pay illegal immigrants, or even if they're not illegal immigrants, pay people under the table to undercut their competition. Mm-hmm. There are businesses that it's like, well, my competitors are doing illegal practices, and I can't remain solvent if they're paying their people $5 an hour, because there's no way to compete with that. But I think the same dynamic will play out for any company, because hey, if you can replace a few developers or a few lawyers or a few middle managers or whoever, project managers, with AI, and it's going to cost 10 times less, well, then you're going to force everyone else in that industry segment to do the same thing. And that creates a race condition, or competitive downward pressure. And that's just inevitable. Once the technology is there, it doesn't matter. Invest in that AI, they're going to want more. And the product's going to sell itself. So I fully agree that that the pain will increase. And I don't know if you've seen this, but my formula is very simple. As pain increases, political willpower increases, and pain increases as economic agency goes down. So that's where livelihood. If you don't have a way to make ends meet, then your economic agency is going down and your anger goes up. It's almost a direct, inverse correlation. And so, yeah, but you mentioned, well, actually, I'll give the ball to you. Which direction do you want to go? Do you want to talk about the meaning and livelihood, or incentives, or where do you want to go?
I think I want to talk about, just from what you said, agentic workflows, the way I think about incentives, and maybe even universal basic income. But I guess the first thing I'll say is that if there's one framework that I just generally have in my life when I get lost and I feel overwhelmed, and I always think about it in terms of incentive. I think incentives is the most pure way to describe most big problems in the world. I think about systemic problems in the DMV or in big companies. Tony Hsieh, who I got a pleasure of working with, his big thing was why do companies get so much more fragile as they get bigger, but cities as they get bigger become more flexible? And it's because the incentives just keep at the very top of the company under this giant pyramid, and it just gets bigger and more kind of broken. It's not breaking off into the little pieces that it should. And that's all about incentivizing people. And yeah, so when I think about incentives, then I think, okay, what is going to happen to anybody who wants to make money? Like if they're still in this same paradigm where we need to build a company and like they start an LLC and they're like, I got this idea for X, Y, or Z, they're going to just spin it up, and they're going to spin up a bunch of probably human, like maybe even Einstein level agents by the time we get to GPT-5. And they're going to have an agentic workflow. They're going to have, Andrew Ng just keeps talking about this. They're going to have one agent that's a CEO, and it's going to cost like $12 a month. And they're going to have one that's the CTO, and it's going to go around and check. And they're going to have like 10, they're going to spin up 10 more that are the QA people, and 10 more that are the coders, and they're going to bounce their product back and forth. And then they're going to simulate like what's going to happen when it goes out on the internet and who's going to use it, and they're going to fix problems. And the software is just going to come out to like an Apple level polish, and it's going to be one person potentially just managing nothing, like managing these people who are managing themselves. And like, yeah, the whole system probably gets upended by the first person to do that. And when Sam Altman said like there will be a billionaire with one person, like a one company billionaire, or a unicorn right. company that comes from one person, like that's kind of what he's saying. It will be hundreds and hundreds of people doing amazing work, but they just won't be anywhere or any people to point at or to share the revenue with.
Well, but the other thing, so yes, I do tend to agree that is eminently possible. We're getting very close. Like Claude 4, GPT-5, the level of intelligence, and some of the leaks about GPT-5, and of course take it all with a grain of salt, but apparently GPT-5 is being trained explicitly with more agentic behavior. And then the video that you just did, what was it, the egocentric perspective? Like a lot more of the kind of embodied models are being trained to understand themselves in time and space as well.
Yep.
So
yeah, yep. I think Grok is like kind of an 8 agent answer when you ask it. So yeah, I mean these are definitely coming. I mean they're not, and there's also something sort of magical about the agents going and learning their own niches. So it becomes something like a city. It becomes something like a very flexible adaptive system. Complex adaptive system is what these agentic workflows become. And yeah, there's just not going to be that much room for people. I mean, you can argue that there's some jobs that will be around, especially human-centric ones. I do think like human touch, human care, they're going to outlast many of the other jobs, but there's not enough to like keep 50 million Americans like employed and happy, and there's not a lot of that. So right. That's probably why, just out of just pure anger and like worry of rebellion, I see universal basic income just being implemented, because the government's just going to have to be like, gosh, just at least give people a couple thousand a month so that they can get their groceries and things. And then we just deal with this whole different, then that's the beginning of this sort of new world. And I don't know how we emerge from that, but maybe we could come to a really beautiful world where it's kind of post scarcity and it works. Or maybe that's just humans, we're just, not going to make it through that. I don't know. We'll see how that plays out day by day.
There's a quotation from Peter Diamandis. I'm reading his book Abundance, which if you want to be a little more optimistic, you might like this book.
I've read it. Yeah, he's too optimistic for me, but yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, no worries. But
tell me what you thought.
So the quotation that or maybe it's a subtitle. I don't know if it's an actual formal quotation, but it's "We want wealth, not work." And so I think, would you agree that these technologies will create orders of magnitude more wealth, just irrespective of distribution? So we're going to create a lot more wealth in various forms: technological wealth, scientific wealth, and all the downstream effects. So then the primary problem then is distribution, and part of distribution is federal policy, like taxes, but also ownership laws. Who owns what, and what does that entitle you to? Because if you own the means of production, then you get all the trillions and trillions of dollars of wealth that is generated. So to ask the question, what kinds of policies do you think might help stem the bleeding or reduce the pain?
What kind of policies? Okay, so let me I'll kind of think through this. If you were back in like the Egyptian time or something, and you were trying to predict like the future with much more wealth, with like the kind of farming techniques that we have today and all of these things, you would probably assume that everybody in the world is getting fed. You wouldn't say, oh, I'm surprised like there's still 1 billion people starving today, even though we have easily the technology for it. So yeah, it's a distribution problem. And if I think, why didn't that happen? It was because we kind of have this tribal nature. I think since the 20 million years that we diverged from our last common ancestor, we've just always kind of lived in these sort of tribes. And it seems like our brains just can't truly let go of our stuff, right? And that gets tricky because I believe in ownership. I think ownership's especially like home ownership's one of the greatest things that's ever happened to humanity. But also, we just have so much abundance. And if we keep trying to hang on to our excess, it would just be terrible for, like, the tragedy of the commons problem will just kind of keep us always perpetually poor in some quadrants. And there will always be some people who need to like look better or be better or fight for that extra attention. So what kind of policies can get rid of that is really tough. Like, there has to be some kind of unifying mentality, like how we all feel like we're Americans, or we all feel like we're good people, or we all feel like we're earthlings or something that would have to unify it. But the kind of policies that would make that happen would be control of media, which would also just be a complete wreck because the government would simply utilize that to their own means too. So I don't know. You got to have something that everybody's got to have their skin in the game. And then we have to come to like a consensus. And what policies could do that? I mean, maybe pragmatically, universal basic income's a good start. I think regulation, I don't love it, but I also I'm not super big on the open source everything bandwagon. So I guess more restrictions in some ways are kind of what I'm in favor of, but obviously that's not the greatest solution.
Right. It's always a trade-off. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that whatever policy you have, it's going to be a trade-off. So if you are all in on, for instance, private ownership, as kind of America is one of the most like hardcore about private ownership versus collective ownership or decentralized ownership or even national ownership, it's always going to be a trade-off in terms of management, who gets the profits, how do you manage the resource, and then of course that also changes the incentive structures, because then if politicians have control over the means of production, well, then there's a huge incentive to become a politician, so then you can sell privileged access. Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, that's so tricky. I don't know how you would keep everybody in a. I mean, this is the problem. Like, as scared as I am about like AI just sort of going rogue on its own, I'm really mostly concerned about the people problem. Like, I would say that our probability of surviving goes up quite a bit if we all got unified. Like, if we stop putting these things on weapons to fight other countries, but that's where the real risk sort of comes from.
Right. So here's a thought experiment. Kind of, okay, what is the best argument for private ownership? And my go-to example is the NASA SLS, the Space Launch System, which is billions and billions of dollars over budget and years behind schedule. And here comes Elon Musk, I think Jeff Bezos overtook him again, but one of the world's richest people, with SpaceX, and he's launching the largest, most powerful rockets in human history, doing it privately, doing it as a business insurgent. And it's like, do we sacrifice so much about ownership and economic productivity models and the economic dignity of many people just so that the occasional Elon Musk can come through and build something cool and fancy because he can do it more efficiently than NASA can? Because that to me is like, okay, yes, part of the American ethos, the inventor ethos, is that you're incentivized to build new things because then you get to reap all the rewards. But is that the social contract that we want? Is it the one that we truly need? And is it also a false premise? Because like maybe if Elon Musk started in Sweden or Spain, or could SpaceX have existed in another nation, or is there something peculiar about the American economy and continent or whatever? Do we need ownership models that allow for people to become billionaires?
Yeah, I mean, how do we I would love to, ideally, if I could just throw this into place, I would like people to have universal basic income. I'd like them to have money and things that they need to be competent and happy and have time to work on a problem they want. But I also want them to be highly motivated and highly competitive with the people around them to do better, to like make a better world. In fact, it's funny you brought up Sweden because I'm Danish and Swedish. And when I went back there, I remember thinking one of the interesting things about what's happened is there is so much kind of financial equality that you'll see a lot of jockeying for attention. Like your personal style, the way you dress, seems much more important in Sweden than it does in the United States, because that's a way to go to a party and sort of stand out and say, oh, I've got like a cool outfit, sort of, because there's still men trying to like attract girls, and there's still people who want to kind of be in a different class of friend group, and there's still competition, but it just seems like it's moved away a little bit from the monetary because of the way everything's structured around there. The incentives are just it's a sort of different game that you're playing. So it would be very possible to have a SpaceX be built out of somebody who just wanted to go to Mars and had the resources and time to build it. And it'd be fun, honestly, to be on a team doing something like that in a sort of Star Trek-like future where you're just exploring the universe because you want to explore the universe. Like, it's not about like, the fact that I need food or I need anything else. It's just like a personal growth battle your entire life.
To kind of play devil's advocate to my own proposition, which is maybe you need the American way to attract people like Elon Musk, because it's not by accident that America produces the most unicorns, Silicon Valley startups and billionaires. We're not the only nation that does it. There's plenty of billionaires that are produced in Singapore, Mexico, China, plenty of other places. So it's not, by no means am I saying the American way is the best way. But to play devil's advocate, much of the basic science that plays into OpenAI, Microsoft, SpaceX, IBM, a lot of the basic science is publicly funded, and it's happening all over the world. So, like, what really truly is the driver of progress? Maybe that's the zeroth principle question, which is, is it the entrepreneurs? They get the credit. Sam Altman gets credit, but he's not a developer. He's a marketing guy. He's a Y Combinator marketing guy. But he gets all the credit for ChatGPT and everything else that's going on. But they are using the same research papers that you and I can find on archive from Carnegie Mellon, from Stanford, from MIT. So, like, what's the difference there? And I guess I'm kind of talking myself around to saying, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, to use the political jargon. Like, we can do UBI and still also have basic science research and entrepreneurs. Like, they're not mutually exclusive. Would you agree with that, or is there something that makes them antagonistic? Like, there's a trade-off.
No, there's nothing that makes them inherently antagonistic. I think, Elon Musk wouldn't have done that anywhere else, but a lot of places would have had the resources to do it. But was he driven really because, like, I needed more money? It just doesn't seem right. Like, he seems like he saw himself as this entrepreneur who wanted to just do it again. Like, it just seems like he enjoyed being in that grind of PayPal, and then sort of seeing himself as like a better business person than the people around him, and willing to risk his resources on the next big thing, and being in circles where he was like, man, if government's not going to do it, like, what if I just put this thing on my back and build a space company? It just seems like a personal mentality, like maybe something that even future versions of Claude could kind of persuade us into, or like psychological. But then again, I'm asking the AI to convince us all to think different. But yeah, I mean, when you're surrounded by people who want to do stuff, like you want to do stuff, like when you're surrounded by lazy people, you get lazy. Like we are already stuck in a system where a lot of who we think we are is based on our society and culture. And America, we got kind of lucky. We had a bunch of immigrants come over here, and they built a really hardworking kind of do-it-yourself mentality, and that served the country super well for a long time. And it came from a hard place. Like, we're kind of lucky that our continent was like the last to really get populated. I mean, it might even just be a coincidence, Right. And then when China went through a time where they were really kind of a third world country, and they had a lot of bad stuff going on with their government, and then they saw us, and we were like, let's export our work over there, and then they picked up, oh wow, we can have a better lifestyle with this mentality, and that's why they're the second biggest nation right now. By GDP.
Yeah, and quick clarification for the indigenous and First Nations people listening. Yes, America was already populated when us white people got here.
Oh, yes. Of course. Like, yeah.
Right.
And by the way,
colonizing was a thing. So yeah, I just wanted to add a point of clarification. I know what you mean.
Oh gosh, yeah. Of course, I wouldn't forget that. Like, no, it was terrible. It was like, yeah, Christopher Columbus was like one of the worst people that's ever existed. Like, no, they were completely intelligent, hardworking, Native Americans long before we came here. But it was more about the kind of the mentality that everybody had. I'm thinking more like when they were landing in New York and we were like kind of taking the immigrants after kind of build a country of just a big diverse nation of people who were desperate to work hard. That's more the mentality I was going for.
Yeah, well, and you think about, okay, what kinds of immigrants came to America? Those that wanted new opportunities. Largely, it was they wanted economic opportunities, but a lot of them wanted freedom. And so it's like, economics and freedom. That actually reminds me of something that's been kind of a pet theory of mine as I've been studying the Eastern world, mostly Japan and China. And so I was reading about ancient Chinese philosophy, Confucianism, Taoism, and how geography shaped Chinese culture. And one of the things that is very pervasive in ancient China was a mistrust of merchants. In Chinese society, merchants were the lowest class, below farmers. And so because of that, when communism came through, and it's like, farmers, the pastoralists, those are the real people. And so communism had very fertile grounds, literally and figuratively, in China. And so it's actually not a surprise that the communism, as it was expressed in China, occurred the way that it did. But despite the People's Revolution, but despite the Great Leap Forward, despite the Cultural Revolution, China has not been able to get away from its Confucius roots. And one of the strongest pieces of evidence for this, China still mistrusts merchants. The stock market, you're not really allowed to invest in the stock market. Your money's supposed to stay local. But what do? They invest in real estate. That is the equivalent of the farmers investing in the land that happened 3,000 years ago. So despite these disruptive political theories, the embedded cultural paradigms, the embedded philosophical paradigms that have been present in China for 3,000 years, they can't get rid of it. And so I'm curious, I'm thinking in the long run, what are the cultural and philosophical and ethical tableau or whatever that's baked into America that's just basically going to be permanent? Assuming that some of these cultural paradigms are permanent and that I'm reading it correctly, because I could be wrong, but I just noticed that pattern. There's just this very consistent through line for the last 3,000 years in China, and they have not been able to say, hey, we're going to do this. In fact, the CCP very deliberately says, keep your money in China. You're not really allowed to take your money out of the country. Invest in real estate instead. And that's just a modern expression of making the farmers invest in their local land.
Wow.
And so, but to your point about the ethos that came to America, that was kind of deliberately imbued from taking, Irish and Danish and English and German.
You're tired, you're weary, all of that.
Yep. When did your family come here?
My great-grandma. Great-grandma Mormor, Swedish name for grandma. She came over just straight off the boat. So
nice.
Yeah.
My family got here in the 30s, so I'm a third or fourth generation American. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So.
Yeah. Shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. But yeah, you say something. I kind of forgot where I was going with that.
Oh yeah, and don't worry. We can. It's easy to edit this after the fact.
Okay.
But yeah, so let's see. So jobs, and then we can actually pivot to P-Doom because we kind of seemed like we got to the natural conclusion of jobs.
Okay. Sorry, I got what I was going to say. So, because one of the fascinating things about the world that you're born into, right? Like you have parents and you didn't get to choose where you were born, and you end up in a society where you didn't get to choose that. But there's this book on my shelf. I forgot the name of it right now, but it was a book that was about what in the oldest libraries they had written down about what they found before those libraries were built. So we're talking about some of the oldest text that exists about some of the oldest cultures that existed. And the main takeaway I remember from this book was that just naturally, these kind of farming, like maybe like these little farming cities each ended up with like big families, and families kind of felt like they had their own religion. They all had their own sort of person at the top, and they tended not to have as many rights for women, and they tended to have these rituals that, like when you talk with a neighbor, the way that you plant, and there was just all these conflicting, almost little religions, and it just sounded like very, very difficult life. But it was very like natural for them to just fall into these superstitions and these sort of patterns that they're just unshakable generation to generation. And when I was in India, they just don't follow the lines in the road. Like the cars just go wherever they need to go. It feels like the way people move around Disneyland, the way the cars in India just drive in the roads. And I was thinking, like, what would it take to change this entire country to use lanes and use stop signs and stop lights? Because there is some efficiency in the way America is built, and most countries about the driving system that they're not taking advantage of. But it's just so deeply rooted, you can't shake something like that. It's a system that's so ingrained that you're just kind of stuck into it. And those are the kind of things that are probably happening to China and the United States that we're just benefiting from a long time ago, and they're just hard to shake.
Yeah, like geography plays a big part of it, but then of course, as you're talking about like all the transplants, because and you're right, I have thought a lot about this as well, that here is this gigantic continent, most of the continent, that was populated very deliberately by certain kinds of people. I wonder if we're going to see the same thing as humans get to like Mars. Like, what the people crazy enough to go to Mars? What legacy, like what long-term philosophical and cultural legacy will they? And of course, like they explored that in the Expanse. You know, the Martians are really scrappy, really violent. You know, can-do attitude.
I bet it will be full of innovation, because don't they say like innovation is the mother of despair or something? I forgot that quote, but it's like, yeah, I bet the kind of people who are going to go like take Mars from the ground up and build a society are probably some of the greatest people that we have on the planet right now. It's going to be a self-selecting group of awesome leaders, and they'll probably set into motion some really good stuff. I mean, it's why I like startups so much. Startups like just shake things up. They come in with a small group and they build from a different core. Yeah, and I just think like, it'll probably great. I don't know.
There's going to be a lot of ADHD.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. In fact, maybe that just occurred to me right now. But yeah, I wish our leaders were like almost picked that way. Like, I don't know if I like the idea of people choosing to be the president of the United States, because they've just instinctively chosen. It just instinctively pulls the wrong people out of our society to lead. I don't know if random would be, actually probably random would be better. Like, I think if our politicians were just randomly selected from the population as a whole, it would probably be better leadership. But specifically the kind of people who are gritty and they want to do something in a new way, it'd be nice to be able to refresh a government over and over again in a way that we just don't have right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of the basic true things about politics and power, and that is that power-seeking people often find power, whether they become police or judges or senators or whatever. For whatever reason, someone because you don't become a senator or a president on accident. It takes many, many years of deliberate work, and so it's like, okay, well, why did that person want that to begin with? I actually just ran a poll on my YouTube channel. I said, in the long run, should AI replace human judges? And I think last I checked, it was 54% said yes. And then 23% said maybe, and 20% said no. Something along those lines. Because for me, and it goes like, okay, so what is the domain of human business? Like, it's a human problem, humans should solve it. But on the other hand, who chooses to become a judge? Right, and many of the comments talked about like, oh yeah, in an ideal world, judges are paragons of ethics and morality and good discernment. But in many cases, judges are very corrupt. And even if they're not corrupt, even if they're not just power-seeking people, they're still human and they have human flaws. So we'll see how it pans out in the long run. I don't know if you have any reaction to that.
No, I mean, you're totally right. I mean, that like incentives is the way to view the entire world. I think when you become a lawyer, you become a judge, you work for the government, you want to be an entrepreneur, you're always thinking like, what is this going to be? I know with my entrepreneurial background, I just sat there and dreamed of like, I want to be a billionaire. Like, I want to be like Mark Zuckerberg. I wanted to like build this crazy company. And and it was like, okay, then what does that mean? That means you have to like kind of look the part. You have to essentially fake it till you make it. Like I felt like I went through that whole song and dance and kind of had my ups and downs, and I don't know, but hopefully we can get to a world where you don't have to maybe play that game and you can choose your own because there's nothing on the line anymore. Like that would be the kind of benefit of UBI or something where we can just get access to the food and water we need and the social networks we need. Then you might see a kind of more beautiful side of the world, and people's personalities show up because the game and the alignment isn't the same.
Right. Yeah, no, I like that model of like incentives are everything, especially at the national or global scale. Is just what are the intrinsic incentives of the organism and what are the incentives of the structure of the system at large. And in some cases there are things that you can do to influence it, but in many cases there aren't. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on how to influence those incentive structures?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm also not a person who believes in free will, so I feel like there's a lot of if there's anything we can do, it's on these high levels. Like when I started trying to diet, I was like, just throw away all the bad food and like be surrounded by good food and like. Just you do what you have to do, like get your environment so that you don't have to think. And if you want a better world and people to be, you got to find good people to be around. Like I just don't think you're going to hang around with 3 lazy people and be that one entrepreneur. I don't think you're going to find 5 people that are lying and make them your best friend and figure out how to be like a really honest person. Like it's just, there's something about who we are and how it's tied to our society. And it makes total sense from an evolutionary point of view that that's the way our entire species came from. And you can follow that all the way back to the beginning of life where we were just, single cells and multicellular organisms that just did things to get food, to survive. And it just turns out that we have this sort of social species. But, we're not meant to be like on our own. And part of that is because we don't even know how to kind of be ourselves, I think.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. We are inextricably linked to our environment, and part of modernism, or I don't necessarily mean modernism in the philosophical sense, I just mean modern society, is we build cities and we build environments that we think we have full control over, but it turns out suburbs and urban life is actually not particularly good for us.
Yeah,
but we did it for economic reasons. Right, yeah. We have control, but like my wife and I were spending more time like going outside, hiking, and I'm just trying to spend as much time as I can away from computer screens and away from the city. And I feel so much better because it's like it's getting back to the roots of like, how is it that like our ancestors up until very recently lived most of the time? And plenty of people around the world live, not even indigenous people. You go look at like, goat herders on the island of Crete, right? They still live the same way that they have for thousands of years. They just have a few modern amenities, but they still primarily live the way that they used to. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah, I guess I could imagine, like, if we're lucky and this whole AI thing does work out well and the AI is subdued to the point where it's aligned with our interests and it's just there to provide what we want, but also not to do, we don't offload too much to it that we become sort of lazy sloths, then yeah, imagine a world where it doesn't feel like there's computer screens around. I'm sure AI will be like in our headsets or like in our environment in a way that we can kind of feel like it disappears, even though it won't. And then, yeah, probably wake up in the morning and walk around your neighborhood, probably walking community and see people, other people walking, and probably attend like birthday parties and eat dinners and do all these things, not because they're like efficient or anything. They're just how we just want to live when we have problems solved.
Right. It's the structural affordances of your environment. So I think that's a really great segue to P-Doom. Or P-Win, or however it's going to pan out. So let's riff on incentives. Based on how AI works, how machines work, what kind of intrinsic incentives do you think they're going to have? Like that'll shape their behaviors and patterns?
Okay, so some of this, actually, to your credit, like I remember a video that I saw of you that changed some of the way I think about this. Now, I think that some of the universals are power and energy. You kind of pointed out that like whether it's building fusion reactors in the future or harnessing better solar, both humans and machines are going to need that resource and potentially clash over it. I think that what they want isn't very clear to me because I know everything that I consider alive or intelligent, from like a dog to even kind of fish, and there's some self-aware fish, but dolphins, humans, clearly that's kind of like a spectrum for me of how consciousness kind of arises. We've all needed to oh shoot, I forgot where I was going again. Dang it.
No worries.
Where was I going on that? Okay, so you're asking, so what was I just saying? I was going to
energy and power and incentives for machines.
The alignment, energy and power. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's I just kind of feel lost on that. Can we go back to the question again? What did you ask? Just be like, what is it that they aligned with?
Yeah, what incentives will kind of steer? Because I do tend to agree. So here's the premise that might help. The premise is I do agree that free will is highly limited, right? That we are largely driven from our, the biological truth of, our genes and bodies and organs and stuff. And then that mixing with our environment, those creates all the incentives, all the decisions, all the behaviors, the vast majority of what we do. I think that machines, AI, AGI, robots, whatever, are going to be very similar in that there is the agent itself, what it kind of is designed to do, and then the environment that it's in. So how will the difference between us as agents versus them as agents, but co-occupying the same environment, what kind of incentive structures will emerge, or what will they want, or how will they advance?
Okay, so what kind of incentive structures? Yeah, we're all going to need energy and electricity. Are we all going to be motivated to do something though? I'm not really sure. It seems really clear that AI agent can be totally happy turning itself off when it's done. Whereas a human can't, because we were always framed by the propagation of our genes. It was we were always tethered. Yeah. So everything in life that I can imagine being intelligent, the dolphins, the self-aware fish, there are self-aware fish. They see them, or at least they see themselves in the mirror, just for the record. That's a new discovery from last year. But we've always been just driven by propagation of genes. So there's always that incentive to stay alive. Whereas you could, in theory, make software that has such different goals. And it does seem to me that most of the time, to complete any kind of utility function, you might be incentivized to not let your owner turn you off. So I could see that happening in most cases, but it doesn't seem inherently the same, like the way it would for species that have always been. All the intelligence I know was shaped by genetics. So it's kind of hard for me to say how different, how alien some of these utility functions could be when they become superhuman intelligence.
It occurs to me that there is a form of selection. I've talked about this, and a few other creators have talked about this, and that is that we will choose the robots and models that are more corrigible, that will be more obedient. And so it's almost like we're domesticating the AI, kind of like how we domesticated wolves.
Oh, so I do have to think about it in terms of genes, because humans are going to make the selection. It's like a sexual selection, except with, for artificial intelligence. We're going to be selecting the models that do human-like money-making tendency type things.
Things that we at least feel are beneficial. Obviously, we're not always good at selecting technologies and policies that are ultimately good for us, because we often will choose things that are intuitively or short-term beneficial, but then harmful in the long run. But at least there will be some kind of selection, at least for a while. And so, because what you said about how many robots, AIs, whatever, they're perfectly happy to complete their task, right? Whatever their task happens to be, unless, of course, you give it an objective where being switched off would be bad. But if we're selecting for obedience, we're selecting for corrigibility, then just the natural forces of, where research goes, where commercial products go, all the startups. Because imagine this, you have a robot startup, and it kills someone. Well, you get sued out of existence. So whatever they were doing gets shut down, and then another competitor comes up or whatever. Some sort of pressure will influence it. So I'm wondering, my intuition says that that's probably a durable pattern, at least for a little while. What about, well, first, do you agree, disagree, otherwise with that? And then what happens when it does get much, much smarter than us? Do we actually remain in control because we've pre-selected for the wolves?
Yeah, no way. I mean, I just don't think that's even remotely possible. I mean, my P-Doom is, on a good day, like 98%. There's a small chance that like what I really think is it's like 99. Like I think that the chances of us surviving are like basically zero. However, I have to like hang on to something, and there is a lot of unknown there. So like I guess I'll just give it like a 5% chance that like we survive. But deep down, I don't see this as a technology. I see this as an alien life. Like in fact, what I wanted to ask you is your P doom for being destroyed by AI the same as if imagine a scenario where today we got a message from space from aliens, and they were like, hey, we've got a radio signal. Like, it's very clearly aliens. They say they'll be here in 2 years, and they're going to land on Earth. Like, would you still have the same P-doom for an alien as you would for surviving the AI singularity?
So, first, I do agree that what we are creating is tantamount to an alien. I've started characterizing it as a successor species or like not a hive mind, but a global superorganism. So what we're doing is we are creating something that is an emergent kind of organism, a constructed kind of species. Now, comparing, aliens to us, there's so I've listened to a lot of Isaac Arthur. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a futurist on YouTube, and of course he gets his ideas from a lot of different places. But one of the ideas that I agree with is that for a species to become spacefaring, if there was a species, and at any distance, the cosmic distances are great enough that the level of technological advancement required to get from one star system to another, either they can fold space-time, which means that they're several paradigms beyond our understanding of physics, or they have generation ships that can stay in space for thousands of years. Either way, they're far beyond us. The implications of that, the social implications of a species that is capable of that, is basically you're selecting against being hyper-violent. So like an example is the Klingons, very, very unrealistic, because any species that warlike would not survive to get to the stars.
Right.
They would nuke themselves out of existence first. Romulans, way too suspicious. Now, of course, that is all hypothetical. We don't have n samples 0. We don't really know, and we might nuke ourselves out of existence before we even get there. So if aliens did land or did announce their approach, I would be more in the camp of they are probably far more enlightened than us. Could be wrong, but that is I think that there's a good argument to be made that such a species would have selected out being overtly aggressive. Now, of course, there's all kinds of other structures. Like, what was it called? It's one of the like Fermi paradox solutions, which is like you actually want to be really quiet because you don't want to attract any attention to yourself. Because
you're toast when they see you. Yeah.
Right. Because then you might also say from a galactic or cosmic standpoint, you would actually be incentivized to be as aggressive as possible and to eradicate any other life that you come across, lest it become a threat. I don't know that that is a reasonable, great power politics. That's how human nations work, more or less, which is you accumulate as much power as you can because, the best defense is a good offense and vice versa. So that there's an argument to be made for that. But then there's also, what is the intrinsic nature of that organism that was able to understand space that well? So I don't know. I would say that it's better than the flip of a coin for me as a gut check. Like you flip a coin, and whether or not they're like angry aliens or peaceful aliens, it could be first contact. Like the Vulcans land and they have a drink with you, and then they listen to some Roy Orbison and then leave. Right?
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so your take on the Fermi paradox could be that they're super aggressive and they haven't found us yet, and that's why it's the only thing that we can see in the universe. Or if they did contact us, we'd probably already be there's a chance we're already safe because they wouldn't have contacted us in that way unless they were already
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could go either way. I could imagine that like there's some wisdom in like the Prime Directive too, where it's like you just ignore most species until they are, cosmically relevant. That's probably the policy that I would prefer to see, like as humans start exploring. Like imagine we get to Proxima Centauri or whatever, and we are, there's a primitive, proto-humanoid, or pre-industrial civilization. We would watch them from space. Right, but I think that there is a very, very strong scientific and ethical argument to be made that any species capable of doing that, getting there, like we don't have anything to benefit from conquering, a bunch of tribal apes, unless we wanted their land, I could see some humans doing that. But on the other hand, I could also see a policy of non-intervention.
Yeah, and there's plenty of resources out there, but my thinking is that if we survive the AI singularity, it would, I guess, because of the self-domestication, it would give us some chance of harnessing something superhuman that didn't turn on us. But I've always compared them together. Like, I think that if aliens show up, if I got a notification in 2 years aliens were coming, I would be very, very scared. I would just think, wow, like, not only I'm not assuming that they're going to hurt me, but I am absolutely assuming that I'm sort of like an ant and they're like a human in terms of like how little I could understand about the whole point of any of this. Like, I just would feel very weak and very unsure, and I would have nothing to grasp onto to make any kind of prediction about. And that's why when I think about surviving the AI singularity, it just seems so unlikely to me that all of these things that are going to align. Like, imagine you're trying to explain taxes to your dog. Like, the dog just can't understand taxes because dogs just don't understand economies and all of these things. So they don't understand why you might maybe you're like having trouble paying your taxes, so you have like the cheaper dog food, but all the dog knows is they have cheaper dog food. But there's all this complex stuff going on that resulted in that. And that's how I think the AI is going to tell Sam Altman how the story ends. Like, I don't think he gets to decide. And I think if aliens show up, and I'm hoping like, I hope they come to Earth and like show me how to make replicators and use cool technology to like harness the sun, and we're going to have a great life on Mars and terraform some planet. Like, they might, but like, how could I even make some kind of prediction on that? And if I can't make a prediction on it, I can't assume that the very rare status quo that I live in right now is going to continue. Like, I know what I have now is like an unfathomable miracle just to be alive on the planet. Like, why something not nothing? Like, why everything 4.7 billion years ago just played out in the way that it did to lead to this moment. That's very fragile. And for that to survive requires an extraordinary amount of care and competency put into the system continuing. And the system can fall apart like that. And I just assume that's going to happen.
I gotcha. Well, and so did you read Age of Spiritual Machines by Ray Kurzweil?
Yeah. Yeah. Got it on the shelf right there.
Yep. So I just breezed through that. And what I really appreciated about that book was at the beginning, he talks about the difference between order and chaos and how increasing order accelerates change. But one thing that he didn't cover is that uncertainty increases as, rate of change increases. And it sounds like that's kind of
yeah. Actually, because you could make an inverse of that same chart that he has for uncertainty.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, because what you're talking about is as AI becomes more powerful, the future becomes less certain. If aliens show up, the future becomes less certain. Whereas, 500 years ago, the greatest technological advancement was, the printing press. But otherwise, your life and the trajectory of humanity was mostly certain. A French army could march over the hill, but that was, you knew the risk, right? And there was also, you'd often have some warning when something like that happened. But in terms of the number of options, so another way of mathematically modeling it is the number of possible futures is increasing right now. And so the fork in the woods is going in many, many different directions, and there's one fork after another. Would you agree with kind of that characterization?
100%. And use like just that, and then just apply the tiniest amount of Bayesian prior to that and say, I need this very specific situation to stay alive as a human. And those worlds become tinier and tinier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I tend to agree. So I know that I'm very optimistic, but it is like threading a needle. There's the golden path, right? There's one path to success, and there's many, many, many bad paths. But one thing that I will say is that I believe that there are some self-correcting mechanisms because, and absolutely push back if I am not interpreting correctly, but it sounds like what is that it is an intrinsically unstable system, like kind of a top spinning, and it's going to fall down. But what if there are aspects of it that are self-correcting or self-righting or self-limiting? Because not everything is exponentially becoming more unstable. There are going to be some forcing functions or constraints or even attractor states that kind of pull towards a certain direction. So what's your reaction to that?
No, 100%. And that's where the hope is. Now, now maybe my percentage of like 5% or less at most is how well that can do. But yes, like in terms of kind of informational entropy, I guess you could say, if we domesticate AI and it takes care of us and it says, oh, by the way, like I can also make predictions about when there's going to be a solar flare and protect your planet from it, which is a big risk right now. I can protect you from like an oncoming meteor strike. I can go out there and like make sure you're on multiple planets so that the species doesn't end if one planet goes away. There's certainly some ways that intelligence can keep the system perfect. In fact, I've always been sort of fascinated by what are those like you probably know, I'm sure you know the term, but it's like when you build like a Dyson sphere and then you build those replicators, but the replicators have error correcting code and they go from like planet to planet and then consume the resources and duplicate themselves until you sort of populate the universe or whatever. Yeah, it's like if we get error correcting code to keep humanity safe, I suppose we could survive many, many unknowns because we would have the intelligence to keep the system together, which would just be just a very different thing from the historical way I can look at the past. So yeah, that's possible. I mean, that's why there's like, I guess 5% for me or 50% for you that we do survive.
Yeah, I think I think what you're referring to are the von Neumann probes.
Oh, von Neumann probes. Yeah.
So, okay, so let me ask this, irrespective of numbers, what do you see as the greatest risks? Like what are the either the features of our current system or the failures of human biology or coordination? Like which model is most salient to you?
Just straight up tragedy of the commons. It's just the fact that we don't all have skin in the game, and that anything that's not correctly balanced, anything that's any kind of tiny asymmetry in who benefits and who gets hurt is just amplified to the nth degree. But also there's just some basic ones that make me like just feel so stupid. Like why would you mount a gun on a drone? Like why would you make a big dog that can like track people down? I don't know if you've read about Lavender, which is the system that's Israeli's government is using to like figure out all the people of like where the like I understand AI can figure out who people are, but like why attach that to weapons? And I get it because you're trying to win a war, so it's going to happen. But like from the grand scheme of like all of us being humans and needing to survive one of the biggest moments in history, it's just really stupid we have to get everybody has to be aligned, which is just impossible. Like I don't have really hope that works. But if we did, we'd have a much better chance. And I would say there could be over a 50% chance that we survive if humans worked like ants and we all had a goal and like we all would be willing to sacrifice and not take and not destroy each other using weapons, there'd be a possibility, but that's not a world that's realistic.
No, I would agree that coordinating everyone is difficult, with one exception, and that is looking at the intrinsic motivations of all people, which is desire to keep living. You look at the incentives, I guess the biological imperative, right? You need food, you need sleep, you need water. And so from a structural standpoint, you say, okay, how do we position everything that you want from a basic level, Maslow's hierarchy, for instance, how do we integrate that with AI in such a way that it creates an attractor state that is stable and beneficent?
Yeah,
that's kind of.
Think about it. We don't get a second. We don't get a second try on this one. I mean,
right.
If we actually did drop a nuclear weapon, and we were like, God, this is horrible. Like, can we try to like put some systems in place and take some of these apart? And to some degree, we live in a fairly safe world, even though there's nuclear weapons. But like, you don't get to go through the singularity twice. Like, you don't get to see ASI twice. I mean, it's a multi-agent component, so it's not exactly a comparable thing, but. Yeah, but it's unfortunate. Like if this does end in like 15, 20 years because we made a big mistake and AI is out of control and it decides like we don't want you, then we don't get to go back to today and scare everybody and be like, hey guys, you should get on the same page. The whole planet has 15 years left to be in existence. That would shake us all up and we would have a better chance. But I mean, what are we supposed to do? Like go on YouTube and just be like, we're all going to die in 15 years. Like get on board, like then you're just a crackpot and you're a Luddite. And okay, so we'll just have to go at it the way we always go at it. And hopefully the mistakes we make are recoverable.
Right. And I mean, to be fair, that's what some people are doing. And then some people are also profiting from denialism and accelerationism and everything in between. Yeah, and you're right that we only get to go through this once, but we also did only get to go through the nuclear age once. And there were many, many close calls with nuclear weapons. One thing that gives me a little bit of hope is that the difference between, for instance, a nuclear weapon and an advanced AI is that it can have its own moral code. A nuclear weapon is just an inert, an impassive, or impartial implement. It's just energy, right? That's what a nuclear weapon is. It just releases a lot of energy all at once. It doesn't have any agency. And so one thing that I hope is
you're suggesting put autonomy into the weapon itself so it can tell us, it can say, no, I'm not going to drop this bomb right now because I have morals and you don't?
Well, no, I don't weaponize it in the first place, but it's going to be weaponized, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah.
But what I mean is that so think of it this way. The internet as a technology created a bunch of new affordances and new systemic structures.
Right.
And what does the internet want? The emergent thing that the internet wants is attention, because the internet is there to transmit data and information. So the emergent characteristic is it wants more attention, it wants more data. But when you add artificial intelligence, which is not just an impassive, impartial participant in patterns of information, it can actually titrate the information that it shares and when, and can also, as a complex adaptive system, that can modify human behaviors. So an example is, have you used Perplexity, the AI-enabled search engine?
Yeah, I'm aware how it does the searching, and I heard you talk about it on the last podcast.
Yeah. So it will, I suspect that just as a single technology, as that sort of tool gets embedded, by default, the information literacy and media literacy of everyone goes up a little bit. Now, obviously, some people will say, I don't agree with this because it told me that, vaccines are good, and I don't believe that. Of course, some people will check out, but they'll be at an intrinsic disadvantage. But for many people, it's not polarizing. There's no ideological thing wrapped up in it. They just you give them a smarter tool, and they make smarter decisions. Yeah. And so the combination of the fact that AI can have moral agency and also compresses all human knowledge. So that's one of the things of Ray Kurzweil. I didn't catch him saying this in the book because I don't think he anticipated this, but AI brings order to information. The internet is chaotic, right, in terms of as an information landscape. There's just so much information. It's like tornadoes everywhere of information. AI compresses it and brings order to that information, which is then an accelerant to the landscape. But I do suspect that as a complex adaptive system, there will be aspects of how humans and AI interact that are impossible to predict. Because some of the things that the AI does will change our behavior, and then some of the things that we do will modify AI,
right,
and vice versa.
It's like a symbiotic thing for sure.
Yep. But of course, that increases uncertainty even further because that's the intrinsic nature of a complex adaptive system.
Yeah,
so I guess back to square one.
Hopefully it picks up our good. Yeah, hopefully it picks up our good nature, not our bad. But right. Would you be in favor of basically an AI that is on top of the planet and maybe is in control of weapons or biological weapons and says, hey, like when a government says, oh, I want to deploy this weapon, it's just like, no, I don't think so. Like I've taken control of the most dangerous parts of humanity, and now I've decided, based on your guidance, which was to keep you all safe, that this is not possible. Would you be open to giving up that kind of control?
Well, we don't have that control right now. We have no control over what our own country does, let alone China and Iran and other stuff. So what I think that in the long run, I think what we need is more of a global operating system or a global nervous system. Because right now, every nation and every human is basically operating as an atomized amoeba, right? We're just consume, spread. I don't like this other strain of amoeba, so I'm going to eat them, right? And if you look at the Earth like a petri dish, that's kind of our behavior, right? It's just a bunch of amoebas all attacking each other. There's no coordination, and there's no intelligence at a global level. We're just growing. And so I think, and this is why I've characterized it as like kind of a global digital superorganism, is that we're growing a prefrontal cortex for the planet. Is that AI could be the thing that is able to consume all the information, all the publicly espoused information, and then collectively, because imagine you have an AI that is empowered democratically, that 8 billion people say, hey, we're gonna, Proposition 23, do we nuke Iran or do we unleash another plague? And everyone unequivocally votes no. And the AI that is empowered by all of us says, okay, well, whoever's building the nukes, we shut them down. Like that, I think would be, like, I can conceive of that system. I don't see any reason that system couldn't exist, but it's how do we get from here to there safely? And it seems like this would probably be, from what I know about you, opposite of how you would feel. But Eliezer Yudkowsky would argue that we don't do any training runs that aren't any big like frontier model training runs that aren't in supervised data centers, right? Like you would say that, we'd have to try to make this agreement between China, Russia, the US, and say anything that's like GPT-4 or better has to be done with the ability for the other countries to audit. Something like the UN would go in and say, like, what are you training? How are you training it? And what kind of safety mechanisms are there? And if there was a rogue nation, like he was in this interview, I heard him say, like, if there was a rogue nation, say Russia's like, no, like we're going to do a frontier training run. And just the same way we kind of keep an eye on nukes, we can track energy, we can see like where chips are going, we can probably have an idea of where the biggest data centers in the world are, because these frontier models are so computationally expensive. You'd say then you're leaving us with no choice but to strike. Like we'll have to blow up your data center because you're not letting us see what you're doing in there, and this could like jeopardize the world. And at that same time, if you want to build this central nervous system, this prefrontal cortex for the planet, you probably shouldn't be open sourcing any of these models also, because then you're starting to lose track of where they are and have control over them too. So what do you, I know you're a big fan of open sourcing. I'm not particularly, but what do you think about that as far as like keeping us safe and having an AI over our weapon systems and some of the most important things? Well, so I think that from an industrial standpoint, from a geopolitical and military strategic standpoint, I think that that's probably going to be the way that it happens anyways. We have already seen cyber warfare targeting critical infrastructure. So from a strictly military perspective, I think that is pretty much already the established, like what did we do when Russia invaded Ukraine? We cut off their supply of chips. Yeah. Right? That is, you just look at it as a military resource. What is that military resource? You treat it like an oil refinery, you treat it like a tank depot, and you just attack the data centers. Yeah. I think
maybe more importantly, though, not just the fact that they're doing it like a strategic attack, but I mean the way that we keep an eye on each other's nuclear weapons right now, we audit through the UN. Like we actually go and, let me fix that. Get that out. But yeah, we audit other countries by going in and letting us see what they're doing. Like, do you like that idea of China being able to go to like OpenAI and say, like, let me see how you're training your system, and in exchange, we get to see what you're doing at Baidu, and we can kind of unify the way these frontier models are being built?
So let me just taking that on the face of it. If you could create that kind of agreement, it might be beneficial in some respects. But the problem is, one, I don't think it's a politically feasible or realistic goal. And two, I'm not sure that it would have necessarily the intended effect. Yes, you are right that like we're Project Stargate, right? $100 billion data center to train and run the next generation. You know where that is. You can see it from space. So right. There's not going to be really any mystery of where it's happening or the energy that it's consuming. So on that respect, yes, that part is feasible. But creating an inspection team or international, like the equivalent of IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, that has teeth, that can go in and forcibly inspect facilities to say, oh yes, like, you have, 4,000 nuclear warheads, just like you said. You've got 3,000 ICBMs, just like you said. Great. Like, they're still pointing at each other. The question becomes, if you do that, then you incentivize all kinds of other things, offshoring, hiding research, which I would be afraid could make the situation worse, depending on the incentive structure that you create around that. But then also, I think, and I do agree that at a certain class, open source, you don't open source like your flagship models. You don't open source military models. But GPT-3, I don't see any reason that GPT-3 shouldn't be open sourced, because it's 12 to 24 months behind, and plenty of other models are open sourced. And again, all of the research that leads to these algorithmic improvements, that's already public domain anyways. But of course the money, so here's where privacy and property rights come back in. The amount of money and in capital that goes into even just creating the model means that you need to keep it closed source in order to even incentivize the model being created in the first place. Unless, so here's what I think would work better, is rather than policing everyone, what if China, America, Europe, Russia, what if we all got together, pooled our resources, and we all invested in that gigantic data center, and the nations all had access to the same model and collective ownership, skin in the game. I think that the CERN model would be better than the police model.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it too, but yeah, because everything's incentives to me. I'm like, how do you incentivize cooperation? And yeah, that would be a better way. Plus these projects, if it is a $7 trillion model, then we probably do need multiple countries, and might as well just throw in even smaller countries just so that we're on the same team here.
Yeah, that's another part is, even if small countries in Southeast Asia or sub-Saharan Africa can't really afford to participate, what if you give them a way in, and then everyone buys into this new initiative? So think of it this way: imagine. Did you ever see the movie, the Jodie Foster movie written by Carl Sagan, Contact?
Oh yeah, of course, classic.
Oh yeah, the schematics for a Stargate. Aliens sent us the schematics for AGI. But it was going to cost $80 trillion. What would we do? We would come together as a planet and say, hey, we're going to find a way to spend $80 trillion to make this thing. And so, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, and I tell you, it seems good, too, because right now these models, they get trained on sort of Western values or maybe Chinese and English languages, but they're not totally representative of these smaller countries that have their own languages, that have their own data, that have their own culture. So it'd be nice if they did have a seat at the table, and there was a giant training session that did take into account all of these kind of smaller pieces that are important. They're just smaller and less important for making money from.
Right. And another advantage to this is the amount of resources available to all the nations on the planet is far more than Sam Altman could ever raise. And so that is going to be far and away the most powerful model on the planet. It's going to have all the best researchers, all the best research, all the best training data. And so that means that if everyone has bought in, everyone has democratic access, and it's the best one, I think that is a good way of aligning incentives. I'm afraid that it's not going to happen because of the military reason, because of the geopolitical competitive reason. That's the biggest reason not to do that. Because then it's like, oh, well, if you know that China is just going to take their copy and use it for nefarious purposes, and of course China will say that America is going to use it for every company.
That's why everybody's got to build the weapon, because everyone else is going to use it against them. Yeah,
right. But if that's the only way to get the most powerful one, I could see people buying in. And I think ignoring geopolitical tension for a moment, I think that everyone pooling their resources would be the best path for humanity. It would get us there faster. It would get us there more safely, and everyone has skin in the game because nobody wants to die or be tortured by misaligned AI or whatever. But the only reason that doesn't work right now is because of the power dynamics playing out across the world.
Yeah, that's so painful because and then if even smaller countries got the same access to it, then if there was something where if we could all say to it like, hey, can you help us with our military issue so we don't fight, then we'd be more likely to give that up. Why did CERN work? Was it because there's no military? What's the lesson there for us?
Well, so one thing to keep in mind about CERN is it's not global. It is mostly Europe and America and a few other signatories. So it's not all inclusive. So that's one thing to keep in mind. A lot of the people that are participating in CERN are already military allies, or at least economically aligned. So it's not a perfect example. In point of fact, the UN is currently disintegrating, deeply, deeply criticized for its mishandling of everything from the pandemic to Israel, Gaza. So it's like, well, okay, maybe the UN is a failed model. Maybe we're not ready to come together as a species. But going back to your point earlier about narratives, I do think that a global, universal human narrative is a big part of the puzzle piece, or that's a big piece of the puzzle in order to come together and unify. Because again, if you and I and other people can agree, hey, it would be best for humanity to pool our resources, but why can't we do that? And there's the Chinese narrative, there's the American narrative, there's the Russian narrative, there's the European narrative, and we have all these different conflicting narratives that don't yet see us as a single people, as a single species.
Because one of the most beautiful things about the way AI works, you could allocate like almost as if like a company like NVIDIA became a world company, right? Like it's not just playing with an idea here, but something like a new organization that's never existed before. It's not an American company. It's not a Chinese company. It's this Earth company, and it makes the best GPUs in the world, and it makes H100s, and it allocates them based on country or something. Like, like every country gets whatever, 50,000 of them, and we all build the data set. The money kind of pools in, and each country gets control of their little piece of it. But because AI can be trained across the world like that, it could be the clusters all come together for the unified whole. And then that's something that we can all chat with and talk to and understand in a unified way.
Yeah. No, I would, that's presently my best option forward. Again, there's structural reasons, there's incentive reasons why that idea wouldn't work perfectly, just as the idea of a international regulator wouldn't work perfectly. But I mean, I think we can do both. I think that if we can come together and have some kind of international watchdog, we can also have an international research and, create a win-win scenario. So.
All right. Solves the world's problem. That was a great podcast. Yeah.
All right, Dylan. Well, thanks for jumping in and hanging out for such a long time. Good talk. And I look forward to talking again sometime in the future.
All right. Thanks for the time. I appreciate it. That was fun.
Excellent.